Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd and this is my review of Terminator Salvation, which I just rewatched for the first time in years, and I actually don't hate this movie. I think this movie had some great things in it, but it also had some major flaws, and maybe I'll start with the bad things. I think this movie was ruined by its ending. I think that whole final act of the movie, that's where everything went off the rails into total stupidity, and it really kind of ruined the whole thing, especially that whole thing of making Skynet stupid. That's really, Skynet is supposed to be the main villain. It's supposed to be a supercomputer which is much smarter than humans, and it's reduced to being so stupid in the end that it really ruined the whole thing. And let me explain. The whole plan of Skynet was to get this new Terminator which doesn't know it's a Terminator because it still has a human brain, and so he still thinks he's human, and this way it can be the perfect infiltration unit. And its whole purpose was to lure John Connor into that compound of Skynet. Even though he met John Connor previously and he could have just killed him with his hands because he was right next to him. So if his purpose was to kill John Connor, then why didn't he simply do it back then? And also Skynet already had Kyle Reese and it used Kyle Reese as a bait to get John Connor to come there. But why didn't it simply kill Kyle Reese? My excuse for that, I made a whole video with the Terminator timeline trying to explain everything. And one of my excuses was to say that that Kyle Reese in this movie was not the real Kyle Reese, because Terminator 5 showed the John finding another Kyle Reese who he then sent back in time. So in my video of the timelines I try to explain it all by saying it's simply a different Kyle Reese with the same name, and maybe that can also explain why Skynet didn't simply kill this Kyle in this movie and instead it used it as bait. And then in the end, when John Connor actually does come here, what is the brilliant plan by Skynet? To kill him? Does it blow him up somehow? Does it close all the doors and release poison gas? No, the plan is to release a T-800 Arnold Terminator to try to kill John Connor, and then that Terminator starts throwing him around the room instead of simply crushing his neck, or instead of simply blowing a bomb next to him or something. So the whole brilliant plan by Skynet was just to lure John Connor, and then Skynet reveals this brilliant plan to this Marcos guy, but then Marcos guy simply kind of disconnects himself from Skynet and goes off to save John Connor, and ends up saving him in the end. And so all of this makes Skynet look incredibly stupid, and it really ruins the whole plot. It really ruins the whole thing because Skynet was so stupid. So he basically made this Terminator who ends up helping the good guys, the humans. It helps save John Connor, and Skynet totally fails again because of this stupidity. Why did it reactivate it? I mean, the movie showed us that Marcos gets deactivated after he hooks himself up to these computers, and then he wakes up again, and then Skynet tells him it's all evil plan, and also it fixed him. He's now brand new again, fixed by Skynet apparently in a few minutes. And then he runs off to help John Connor, and Skynet had no way of stopping it. So this makes Skynet look so stupid that it really ruins the whole plot. Also, the fact that Marcos basically became the main character instead of John Connor, that kind of robs John Connor of what he should have been. He should have been the main hero. He should have been the one to defeat the Terminators, and instead it's Marcos. Marcos is the one to save the day in the end. He is the one who saves John Connor. He even sacrifices himself in the end for no reason to save John Connor, even though he would have been much more valuable to them because he's such an advanced Terminator. He is able to hook up to the systems of Skynet, so he would have been much more valuable to the Resistance actually, I think, than John Connor, who didn't really do anything that clever the whole movie. He did have a few neat scenes of him being a good soldier against the machines, but he didn't really do anything that brilliant, and he basically fell into the trap of Skynet. And there was also that whole subplot about the humans discovering that signals that all the machines use, and they figure out how to shut off all the machines, and John Connor volunteers to test it out, but it never occurs to him that it might be a trap by Skynet, even though he knows that the war is not supposed to end this quickly. He's supposed to know about the future, that dark future from which the original Kyle came from, in which they basically were living like rats in the tunnels, and the machines totally exterminating all of them. And he knows it didn't happen yet, and so he's supposed to be able to predict that this will not work, they will not be able to defeat Skynet so easily, and yet he doesn't seem to realize that, and he falls into the trap of the machines. It turns out it was all a ploy by Skynet to figure out where their leadership is located, where that submarine is located. So it kind of made John Connor stupid as well. And the main character of the movie was basically Marcos Wright instead of John Connor, who was reduced to kind of a secondary hero, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it just doesn't fit together. So Marcos is the real hero of the story. His very existence makes Skynet look stupid because Skynet shot itself in the foot basically by releasing this Marcos and fixing him up in the end, reactivating him in the end before waiting. Why didn't it wait until John Connor is dead and then reactivate Marcos? Then it would have won, then John would be dead. And also the fact that they revealed to us, the audience, that Marcos is a Terminator right from the beginning, because first of all we saw it in the trailers of the movie. They showed us that Marcos is a Terminator, and then the very first scene of the movie was him being executed by a lethal injection and donating himself to science. And so right from the start we were basically guessing that he's not human. I think the movie should have been set up for that to be a surprise, meaning we could have seen him going out of that place where the machines were making experiments on humans. We could have said he has memory loss, he doesn't remember anything about his past, that's fine. Then we can follow him around and then have a surprise twist of him being a Terminator. That could have been cool. And yet this movie kind of ruined that with that opening and with the trailers, so that was a huge mistake as well. Another mistake is that this movie is finally taking place in the future, in the war against the machines. That's great, but it's not anything like those flashbacks we saw in the other Terminator movies, which always showed glimpses of that future. And this movie didn't look anything like that. It looked much more like Mad Max and those kinds of wasteland movies, which were still, it's still fun. That's why I'm not totally hating this movie. I will get to what I liked in a moment, but it just doesn't fit those flashback scenes we saw. And it doesn't even match the dialogue by Kyle Reese in the original movie, because the way he described the future, that they were being exterminated in concentration camps, in death camps, that he was working loading bodies. He had that tattoo on his arm like Holocaust survivors, only with a barcode instead of numbers. And he said that John Connor saved them from that camp and showed them how to defeat the machines. We didn't really see that in this movie. We did see John Connor save them from prison, but we didn't see that whole aspect of a death camp and loading bodies and all that really dark sounding things. So I don't think it really matched that dialogue. We can assume maybe that happened later in this new timeline, or maybe it happened differently because it's a new timeline, so it didn't happen at all. But it's still disappointed. We wanted to see that future as we saw in those flashbacks of all the people living in tunnels, having nothing, living like rats, fighting a hopeless guerrilla war against the machines, coming from underground, all that stuff. We didn't really see that. We saw something totally different, so that's very disappointing. It would be more forgivable if there was another movie set in the future in which they did do it right, then maybe we could have forgiven this one. But because this is the only movie that is completely set in the future, and it doesn't really do any of those good things, that is disappointing. However, despite that disappointment, I still like the movie because it's still set in the future, it's still the war against the machines, it's still a nuclear wasteland, which is an idea I always liked. I always liked movies like that. It should have had more stuff like, nuclear fallout, maybe add some mutants to the mix, add something scary other than the machines. The movie could have done a lot more with that whole setup, but it was a cool setup. We have some scenes of Marcos seeing the destroyed city and stuff like that. That's something I always liked. And now I'll talk about what I liked most about this movie, which was all the action scenes against the machines in this future wasteland, which I actually thought a lot of them are really good scenes. We meet the young Kyle Reese, and he's fighting the machines on his own, and he has that sidekick girl who kind of reminds me of Newt from Alien 2. I guess that was the idea. She was like the Newt of this movie, even though they didn't really do anything big with her. She was just there all the time in the background. I heard somewhere there might have been a twist in the end of the movie that she would have been revealed to be a Terminator, maybe some advanced T-1000 type of Terminator, something like that. That could have been an interesting twist if she was there right from the beginning, and in the end she ends up with the Resistance, and then it turns out she's like an inside spy from Skynet. That was the whole plan all along. That could have been a neat twist, because she was so cute and innocent looking, like that's the last one you would expect to be a Terminator, a child Terminator. That's an interesting idea. But they didn't do that, so that character did end up kind of being pointless, but I still kind of like that idea of that kind of character, kind of a Newt type, like in Alien 2. I just wish they would have done something with her by the end, get the audience to care about that character and then put her in real danger, or even kill her, maybe do something dramatic with that character, and they didn't do anything. And Kyle Reese himself was awesome in my opinion. That actor also played Chekhov in Star Trek, and he died in an accident later, so that's too bad, because I think he's a good actor. He was a very good actor, and he was also a very believable younger Kyle Reese, and that was also a neat way to recast the actor in a believable way because he's a younger version of that same character. So you could believe he grows up into the Kyle Reese we saw in Terminator 1. So I think the casting was very good. And he was very good as a character. They even showed how he learned some of the stuff that he later used in Terminator 1. That thing with the rifle, which turns out Marcos taught him. It's a little bit laughable maybe because it's like the formula of every type of prequel movie has to explain everything, so every single trick that character knows has to be explained. It kind of reminds me of Star Wars Solo, in which we had to see that scene of how he got his gun, or how he got that thing or that thing. So it reminds me a little bit of that, but it's like the only example. So that's like a neat reference. And by the way, this movie had a lot of references to older Terminator movies, a lot of little scenes which are similar deliberately, which is something that is always being done in any series of movies. Each movie has to somehow reference the previous movies in such little Easter egg kind of ways. But what I like in this movie is that they did it in a way that feels natural. Like, it didn't feel forced. None of those scenes felt like they are copying the exact scenes from previous movies, or they are like doing that in your face, like oh, here you go, that's that thing from the other movie. But in this one it all feels natural. Like, if you only saw the other movies once, you wouldn't even notice any of that. I only noticed all of them because I watched the old movies so many times, and so I recognize a lot of those elements. But I like the way how it's like nuanced in a very gentle way, which feels natural to this movie. And so I love that. I love the fact that all those similarities are just for the hardcore fans to notice, and they don't feel forced and artificial. They feel totally natural and smooth together with the plot of this movie. So, for example, Marcos taking that rifle away from Kyle in the exact same way as the Terminator did in Terminator 2, which kind of makes sense because he's also a Terminator here, and also in one scene someone punches him in the face, and then he kind of turns back toward that person slowly. So that was exactly like Terminator 2. They also did that in the end when Arnold shows up. They also do that even when he was a skeleton, when in the end of the movie when Arnold shows up and they quickly burn off his skin because it's too expensive to have Arnold, and so he turns into a skeleton Terminator, and then someone kicks him in the head, and then he kind of turns back slowly in exactly the same way as Arnold did in T2. And so that was kind of brilliant. That was really funny. And it makes sense. It feels natural because this is the same type of Terminator with the same programming, so it makes sense for them all to behave with these same mannerisms. And so that was funny. Other references, when John Connor wanted to steal that bike of the Terminators, he played the same music that he was playing in T2 when he was riding the bike, and here he used that music to lure those bikes to him. And it was cool in the end of the movie when we saw John Connor, how awesome he is when he knows how to hack into the machines and all of that. We should have seen more of that. That was a really cool way to show in why he is such a good fighter against the machines. And also all those references to T2 when we saw him as a little kid hacking into the bank and stuff like that, which we now see how it all is useful for him. So that was great. And some of the other action scenes, like the chase scene with the truck, which also was very similar to the chase in T2, but done better and done in a fresh way. Like, it didn't feel like just copying the same scene. It felt like something new and original, but also similar at the same time, but feeling natural. That scene of the bike robots chasing the truck was awesome in my opinion, one of the best action scenes. And it's also like a neat reversal. Like in T2 it was a truck chasing a bike, and here it's robot bikes chasing the truck. So it's like the opposite. And some of the shots, some of the way it was filmed was very similar to that scene in T2. But it also felt even better. It felt more awesome. It's all in the dystopian future with all the old cars all around them, and the cool truck, kind of like in Mad Max. And so all of it really worked in my opinion. So a lot of those scenes were great. I also loved all the different kinds of Terminators. Some of them were a little bit silly, like those robot snakes. Like, what's the point of them? What they are supposed to be doing in the water? It was never explained. The giant Terminator was somehow able to sneak up on them when they were hiding in a gas station. Suddenly a giant Terminator showed up, and it's not clear how exactly was it able to sneak up on him. If it's so big, it should be doing a lot of noise. But other than that, it was pretty awesome. Like, I love the fact there is a big variety of different robots, because why should the Terminators be humanoids if they're not designed for infiltration? Like, it makes sense for a Terminator who is supposed to look like a human in order to infiltrate the resistance or to go to the past. That makes perfect sense. But the robots that are used in the war itself, why should they be humanoids? They should actually be some more efficient design, maybe even looking like insects or something. So, you know, like in the Matrix movies, obviously Skynet would pick the best possible design for a mission. And so seeing an army of humanoid robots would not actually make sense. And so that's one of the reasons I like the fact that in this movie we see a much bigger variety of different kind of Terminators, different kinds of machines. Some of them huge, some of them small, some of them totally different, some of them bike robots, which might have been also a little bit silly, because what would the bike do if it doesn't have a road, if it has to go up some hill or something? It wouldn't really be useful. They're only useful on roads, basically, so maybe they should have shown them being able to transform into a different type of robot for a different landscape, something like that. But then it would be like Transformers, I guess, so maybe that's not a good idea. But overall, I liked all those action scenes in the desert, all those action scenes in the wasteland. A lot of it was great, and that's the main reason I don't hate this movie. I kind of liked all those parts of the movie. Suddenly I realized, that scene of Marcos telling that little girl to get out of the car, that's also kind of a reference to the older movies, because in each of them we had the scene of a Terminator telling someone to get out of a truck or out of a helicopter, and here we have a scene of Marcos telling the little girl to get out, but it's done in a totally different way and it feels natural to the story, and that's why you don't even realize it's kind of, I guess, maybe not, maybe I'm imagining, but I think it's also kind of a subtle reference to the older movies, but done in a totally different way, and it could have been like another clue that is a Terminator. If this movie would have been set up as a mystery, if they didn't reveal this plot point right from the start, then this part would also be like a neat clue that he's a Terminator, because again, he's behaving in a similar kind of way. And so I think actually a big part of the movie is actually good, but the ending ruins it. The ending is so stupid, especially the whole part with Skynet fixing Marcos, and then Marcos runs away and saves John Connor, so why did Skynet do that? So that was dumb. And making Marcos the main hero of the show, I think it was done deliberately, because in the original ending, how it was written, from what I heard, it was supposed to end with Marcos becoming John Connor. John Connor was supposed to die, and then to keep that legend living or whatever, they were supposed to take his face and put it on Marcos, and so John Connor would have been a Terminator, which is a very silly idea, because in the first movies they established John Connor as being so important that Skynet had to send someone back in time to stop him and all of that. But if they basically killed the real John Connor and replaced him with someone else, then that would mean Skynet was stupid from the get-go. It was stupid from the beginning, because John Connor was never really important. It was all just a legend, just a myth, and he could be replaced by someone else and would still win, and so that makes it stupid from, it would ruin the first movies, and so I'm glad they didn't do that, because that would make John Connor pointless from the beginning. And also John Connor was an awesome character, so why kill him off so early, way before the time that he's supposed to win the war? And so that would have been stupid, so I'm glad they didn't do that, but that would at least explain why they are setting up Marcus as the main character of the movie, because if he becomes John Connor later, then it would make sense why we spend so much time on him and not the real John Connor. So I'm glad they changed that, but it does look stupid that he gets stabbed through the chest with such a big pipe, so how is his heart even still in there? So they say his heart is damaged, but from what we saw in that injury, he should be dead. He cannot survive for so long until he gets the surgery, and so that also made it kind of stupid, because how is he even still alive? So then Marcus decides to give his heart to John Connor, which is kind of silly. I mean, they do the operation in the desert. They don't even know if his tissue matches that of John Connor. He doesn't have the same blood type. So how can they decide that? And also, since he's a Terminator, does he really need that heart at all? Would he not be able to work without a heart? So maybe he didn't even die. I guess that's something that could have been explored in another movie set after that, which they never did. They never continued that specific timeline. They did something totally else in Terminator 5. And by the way, I did like how he got his scars, how he got that specific scar from the Terminator. That was neat, and it fits what we saw in the other movies. John Connor always had that scar in the future, but then I guess it means it is all in the same exact timeline, which doesn't really make sense because of all those changes, and I made a whole video on that. So why did he get exactly the same scar? That means it had to have happened in exactly the same way in all those other movies, in all those other timelines. So that's kind of a little bit too convenient, but overall at least they tried to tie something well. At least they tied something and explained something in a neat way, so I did kind of like that. And that final fight with the Terminator, the T-800, was cool in my opinion. I mean, Arnold did look a little bit fake, but that's okay because he's supposed to be the first of that class of Terminators. So maybe they didn't work out all the bugs yet, so it makes sense for him to look kind of artificial. And so those special effects, they kind of fit the fact that he's a robot, an android, and so I think it works. And also the fight itself was pretty cool, except the part of him throwing him around, that was stupid. But overall I thought it was neat. It was also a funny bit of the Terminator imitating the voice of Kyle Reese, and then John Connor following that voice and suddenly meets the Terminator, so I found that funny. But John Connor should be smarter than that. He should have realized, he should have remembered they are able to do that, and he didn't. So, but overall I like that. Overall I liked most of the action scenes in this movie, and that's why I don't really hate this movie. I think it has a lot of redeeming qualities. It has a lot of cool shots, like for example all the parts with that older type of Terminator, the T-600, they all looked very cool. They kind of look like human only from the distance, and they carried those huge miniguns and all of that, so that was very cool. They even had the scene of one of them kind of stepping on a skull, just like in T2, but in a different way. Again, it feels fresh and different. It doesn't feel like just a rip-off of the other movies, and yet with a reference at the same time. So I thought all those little moments were great, and so I love the T-600s. I thought those were very cool. The part of him shooting his own leg to get free and chasing them around, and the minigun is always cool. And so a lot of moments in this movie were actually great. That's why I don't hate this movie, and I might even put it above T3. Like in my previous review of Terminator 3, I said it's the best of the sequels. I'm not so sure anymore. I think maybe Salvation, despite all its flaws, and it has many, it still overall I think might be better than T3, because T3 was just a recycling of T2. It was basically the same movie again with the exact same kind of scenes. So that one felt like a ripoff and a self-parody. It didn't take itself seriously. And so T4 is better in my opinion, because at least it feels fresh. It feels like a progression of the story. We now see the future war. We see a whole bunch of other types of Terminators. We have a whole bunch of cool scenes. We see the young Kyle Reese. We see new characters. So overall I think maybe T4 is actually still better than T3, despite all its flaws. And so that's my opinion so far. In my next video I will review Terminator 5, which also had some redeeming qualities, especially in the beginning. It finally did a few things. I did like a few things in that movie, but overall I think that was probably the stupidest Terminator movie. It had so many plot holes and stupidity that it's really can't be taken seriously at all. So I think Terminator 5 is the worst one, but I will rewatch it again to do a proper review of Terminator 5, so that will be in my next video. And all of this is in preparation for Terminator Dark Fate, which I'm still kind of cautiously optimistic because of James Cameron being involved, and so I'm optimistic, but from all kinds of rumors I heard about that movie, it might be maybe even worse than Terminator 5, but I guess we'll wait and see. So that's it for now. Let me know what you think and we can discuss it in the comment section, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.